Thy name is my healing, oh my God. A remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing, and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise, the all-knowing, the all-wise.
Before we begin the lecture for tonight, the lecture and reading, I made some notes that I want to share with you. One is that this, I'm trying to, one of the main teachings of the Baha'i faith is associating the people of all faiths in a spirit of amity and concord. They said that if you're a Baha'i, you have to go to different churches and synagogues and mosques and worship with them, because it's the same God, same message. If occasion arises, something that Baha'i faith enlightens you upon, which means if you're divisive or there's some hateful messages, try to if opportunity arises, share with them the message of oneness of God, the message of healing rather than division. So this is what this old age I'm attempting to do, and I've really learned it, because for years I talked about these things, but I never totally practiced it. But since I started to practicing this vision of Baha'u'llah, basically my life has also been transformed, because I was talking about it, but the past 30, 35 years I've been doing it, more so in the past 25, 30 years. But this last week I went to a Methodist church. We're all searching, and we're all trying to heal and become one with the Master of the Universe, but everyone is struggling and trying. So you guys in unity are much closer to the Baha'is. Methodists, maybe next step, then others. But then Brian Germano, who's the pastor, one of the two pastors there, is a member of this interfaith group that I go with Richard and others. And he was the preacher. His topic was how to read the Bible. How to read the Bible. And I've been going to so many churches, but this was a very pleasant surprise, because his talk was basically a Baha'i talk, what I've been talking about here. Which means he said, he started with this, that he said, he apologized to his congregation, that some of you may be offended, some of you may not like it, but try to think about it, try to be open about it. And he said that based on all of my years of struggle and reading and searching religion and Christianity, I have come to the conclusion that moral teachings of Jesus, by the same token all religions, is essentially the same. It's eternal, it's everlasting. But social teachings have to change. And then you start reading from the Bible. Kill this guy, kill that guy, and this and that, and then chop off this guy's hand, just like this is what you see happening in the Middle East these days. Chop off this guy's hand, or what else? He gives so many examples. Or don't eat pork, and women have to cover their head. These are all in the Bible, right? on and on and on. He read about, I don't know, 50 different passages. And he said, are you doing these things? Has anyone of you covered her head here in this place? I'm sorry I'm insulting you, but this is the way I see it. Social teachings of religion have to change. If they don't change, we become fanatic, we become prejudiced, we become outdated. All of these things. I mean, he was saying it very boldly, but then he kept saying, I'm sorry, I don't know. I said, why does he say that? Because as a Baha'i, this is the main message. Moral teachings stay the same, social teachings have to change. And then he went a step further. That's what Baha'u'llah has done. That a lot of things in the scriptures, and I may have mentioned it briefly, a lot of things in all scriptures are in the form of parable and stories. And a lot of them, he quietly said, I don't know how many people heard it, but I heard it. A lot of them may not have been written by Jesus or Moses. Because I mentioned that Old Testament was composed in the course of 800 years. If I tell you something and you go out and repeat it, you don't exactly repeat what I told you. What if, what they attribute to Moses was composed in the course of 800 years, many of it stories just hearsay, until they came, the rabbis were sent to Jerusalem by Cyrus the Great, and then they formed the Bible. So, and he was saying, how can you believe in these things as to the full letter as the Word of God? He went through, some examples of the world was made in 6 days, and this guy lived to be 940 years, 800 years. He says there's either deeper meaning to these things, or some of them were not even true. So I said, wow, that's a Baha'i lecture. I've never heard such a bold, clear lecture in a church. And I've been going to church for many years. And then another interesting happened. As I was walking in the lane of going and congratulate him, Brian, and say thank you for the wonderful job that he did, and how close this is to the Baha'i ideals, I noticed a number of churchgoers in the back who were ticked off, who were angry about it. And they were saying that, I wish I could go and stop him right in the middle of his talk. Just like that. Again, for you guys that may be strange, but this was a more traditional church. I should have stopped him. I could have stopped him. And then she was trying to get sort of a group, a ring with her. And then they were listening, and some of them said, nodding their head, yes, they're doing this. So I couldn't hold myself. And they were noticing that I'm turning back and looking at them. And she said, what do you think? I said, well, ma'am, and Brian had also talked about slavery, which is sanctioned in the Bible and in Quran. Inequality between men and women. You are basically obedient to husband and this and that. Inequality. So anyway, so I turned back and I said, well, it was a long time ago. It was 19th century. If you want to go back to slavery and all the things that happened from the time of Lincoln up to Martin Luther King and the present, with regard to what happened to the black race and what they have done, maybe you should go back. So I was saying it in a way that she could understand and others could understand. I was saying it loudly also. If you want to go back to what is happening in the Middle East, with the way women are treated, and you all want to cover up and this and that, we can go back to 18th century and before that. But if not, let's listen to what your preacher was telling us. Let's listen to it. Let's understand the difference between moral teaching and social teaching of religion. And this and that. And so I sort of gave a talk, like what I've done here. And maybe about 5 minutes or so. And then she wasn't convinced by the preacher, but she was convinced by me apparently. She nodded and said, I think you're right. and she was pacified, so, and moved on. So I think that was a great message. That's a wonderful message, and that's where we are. The next thing I want to say before we go through this is that, as we have been saying, Old Testament was composed in the course of 800 years. New Testament was composed in the course of 50 to 70 years. After Jesus, right? Quran was composed in the course of 10 to 30 years after Muhammad. So as the timeline gets closer, it becomes more authentic, right? In terms of it. But for the first time in the history of religion, everything you see here, and much more, although Baha'u'llah and his son Abdu'l-Baha were in jail or under house arrest, he for 40 years, and Abdu'l-Baha was almost 60 years, he was an old man when he was freed. Everything is written, signed, sealed by them. And everything. So they don't have an excuse in saying that I didn't say it. Everything is authenticated, so that others would not also come and begin another sect and saying that this is, this is what I think Baha'u'llah said. You're wrong. Our denomination is right, so you can't do it in the Baha'i faith. Okay, that's what I want to show you. So, has anyone been to Israel? You go to Israel, Haifa is one of the 7 wonders of the world. If you go to this mountain. Mount Carmel is the mount that is also mentioned in the Old Testament and New Testament as the Mount of God. And somehow Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha were prisoners there. And then, with the help of Baha'is, they kept buying a lot of property. So a large portion of this mountain, coming sort of almost to the top, belongs to Baha'is and became Baha'i shrines. I'll tell you what the history is. But one of these buildings, which is this, is called the Archives Building. All the originals of these, signed and sealed, are preserved forever in here, in this building, if the terrorists don't get to it. So that's
the archives just on the Baha'i faith books?
All the Baha'i books, all these books, basically the original of them.
And how many did you say? Did you say there were 170?
Approximately 100. But then, the more correct number is what we call 15,000 tablets. Now, one tablet could be 5 pages, another one could be 50 pages. So they said that if you put them all together, it becomes like 100 volumes of books. Some small books, like the Hidden Wars that I gave you, and some larger ones that we go through tonight. So that is that aspect. Now with that, I need to give you the history timeline, and after the timeline, we start reading. The timeline is this: if you the faith began in Iran. They said that the map of Iran looks more or less like a cat, as the Russians and Mongols and Turks and all that cut different pieces of it, what was left of Iran is something like this. As I said, when Bob declared himself, just like John the Baptist, he declared himself as the forerunner of the manifestation to come. He came from the city of Shiraz, which is a city in the southern part of Iran. Very beautiful city.
Was it all called, at that time, was it all called Persia, or was there actually an Iran?
Iranians, I think, called it Iran, but in the West, it was known as Persia. And here, when we read about it, we read it as Persia, or the Persian Empire. When it was larger. So it was Persia, so we think of it as Persia at the time. So he gave that mission in 1844 in that city. The soonest, and that is also interesting to mention, that we mentioned the history of the 10, 15 years before that. Has anyone heard of the Millerites in the U.S.? Millerites of of 19th century. That was a denomination which began in South Carolina. I think they were the ones who became Seventh-day Adventists, or some groups of them became Seventh-day Adventists. They, according to their reading of the Bible, there's so many prophecies, we'll mention some of them next time. They had come to the conclusion that the time is near, the time of the return of the Messiah. As we say, Christians, the return of Jesus, and the glory of the Father, and every religion has a name for it. But Baha'is believe it's all one and the same. They just, they have their name. So then the Millerites in the U.S., in Germany, there was a huge group of Christians who were also had read the Bible and said that the time is near. And so those who were from Germany, they actually came to exactly this place, Haifa, right at the foot of Mount Carmel. This is the mountain. Actually, this book was put together by Israel, the government. And so this is part of the mountain, which is beautified by Baha'is. The 19 terraces going up to the shrine of the Baha, the form of the Baha. Right? And so, so these Millerites actually came to the foot of this mountain in Haifa with their binoculars, because they said we have written the Bible. When Jesus returned, he would return, we mentioned last time, riding on a horse over the clouds. And so they took their binoculars, they were sitting, these poor people, for years on Mount Carmel, watching for Jesus to return. I don't know. And here, around that time, Baha'u'llah was a prisoner. There, that's also an interesting connection that we need to let's see. I have another booklet here, I can find it to show you. Oh, here it is. And I'll see if we can find that prison near Haifa in Akka and Haifa, too close. Here, that prison is still there. They kept him and his family and like 78 people in this jail for 2 years with inadequate food and water and awful room that we see. So he was there, and they were looking with binoculars at Jesus to come. At the same time, the parallel of the oneness of religion that Baha'is teach is that there were a huge group of Muslims who were called Sheikhis. And these Sheikhis, through the reading of Quran, had also come to the exact conclusion that the time of this return, this time period of 1840 to 1860, that time period. And so their center was actually here, Baghdad, the capital city of today's Iraq. So, and they were forcefully teaching and preaching to the Islamic world that the time of the return is here. And we have to be cognizant and aware and watchful for this return. But as Christians were waiting for him to come over the clouds riding on a horse, Muslims were waiting for him, for the Baha in particular, to come out of the well. That they say he's alive and well, sitting there for 1,200 years and waiting for the right time to come out. So all of these are parables and stories and vision, right? That people read literally and look at it as that's the way it should be. So, so then here comes this man in 1844, Bob, in the city of Shiraz, saying that the Messiah that you're waiting for, specifically two Messiahs, like John the Baptist and Jesus, same in all religions, is me, and I'm telling you that the time is coming for the prophet will come who will usher in this message of golden age or peace on earth. And he'll have a plan for the humankind. So that's the plan which we'll just look at some of it. So that was that beginning. And then the Baha was there and he gave that message, but then how bad Iran is these days with regard to religious fanaticism. Imagine how it should have been 170 years ago, right? So what he said, what he prayed, is that 18 people would come to him, like disciples of Jesus, rather than he going and preaching to start with. So 18 people, the history says, this is the history of the first 10 years of the Baha'i faith. Just an amazing history. 18 people came to him, and these 18 people were called Letters of the Living. And when that number was complete, then there was one woman, these 18 and 17 men. And he asked them to spread all over the large Iran, Middle East, maybe Iran at that time, and give my message. And he also wrote many books. I just brought this compilation is from him. Basically, a lot of homilies, a lot of prayers, a lot of asking God to help, and this and that, just so you can look at it. Actually, to have a little change, the part that I've marked, right there, let's see that. I usually, this I've marked one of them. Just go ahead and read what this. He's pleading to all people of the world. In this one, I guess he's pleading to Christians.
Issue forth from your cities, O peoples of the West, and aid God ere the day when the Lord of mercy shall come down unto you into the shadow of the clouds with the angels circling around him, exalting his praise and seeking forgiveness for such as have truly believed in our signs. Verily his decree hath been issued, and the command of God, as given in the mother book, hath indeed been revealed. Become as true brethren in the one and indivisible religion of God, free from distinction, for verily, God desireth that your hearts should become mirrors unto you, brethren, in the faith, so that ye find yourselves reflected in them, and they in you. This is the true path of God, the Almighty, and he is indeed watchful over your actions.
So in his writing, you see a lot of pleading, a lot of asking, a lot of seeking humanity to become pure and ready. Just in many ways, just like these Millerites and German settlers who were asking for renewal of faith. And so he was also in that mode, but we know him as the forerunner of the Baha'i faith. This is one of his short prayers. Is there any remover of difficulties save God? Say, praise be God. He is God. All are his servants, and all by his bidding. So anyway, these people came, became Babis, the first 18, and they boldly went to different towns, teaching what he was teaching them. And of course, one by one, they were executed, they were tortured, and then hundreds of thousands of people who became Babis were in turn tortured and executed. This actually an Atlanta artist. There was no photography at the time. The faith began in 1844, the Babi faith. And this is his vision of the first person, whose name was Mullah Hussein, who this is a vision of riding a horse and the people who became Babis, and they were going to the first Babi conference. But Baha'is now have a lot of conferences across the globe. They call them intercontinental conferences. Thousands of people from different continents get together, working on the vision of oneness of mankind. But this was the first man. The Babi himself was 25, I believe he was 27 or something like that. when he became the first believer. So they were going to a conference. And in that conference, Baha'u'llah was also, in 1844, he became one of the followers of the Baha. And as I said, from these 18, one of them was a woman. That's also the vision of this artist of who that woman was, whose name is Tahir, or his title was Tahir, which means the pure one. And she was a very erudite woman back then, 170 years ago. And she also went to that conference, and these Babis went to the conference. But for the first time in the history of Islam, she unveiled herself. She took the veil off. And that was part of the message of the new faith, that you need to put aside all these social teachings. What this minister was talking about. At the time, for many of these social teachings of Islam and Judaism, and all of them was practiced also in Christianity, that time is past. The time is a time of equality between men and women. The time is putting aside slavery. The time is putting aside all those dietary things of not eating pork, this and that, and many others. He was already teaching some of those principles. So she took up her veil. For the first time in the history of Islam, from the time that they were forced to wear a veil and to become subservient to men, that was the beginning. And that was exactly the time that in 1848, in New York, there was the women movement. And that led to 1918 or 19, was it? Women emancipation and voting rights and all of that. So it was exactly the same time period, which is also amazing. Right here. And with that, then I'll summarize the history of the Baha with the conclusion of that period, that they took him, also they tortured him, took him from city to city, until they took him to a northern city of Iran called Tabriz. And in order to give a lesson to everyone, once and for all, his life story is so much similar to the life of Jesus. He was a young man, he was 31. He was 25 here, and it took 6 years. And the torture, and this and that, and so thousands were flocking to him. And they finally took him to the city, took him to the main square of the city, and they shot him to death by a firing squad of 750 soldiers. They wasted 750 bullets. I won't tell you the whole story, but to kill him, to quash this movement. This is the way inhumanity of man to man is. Inhumanity of man, particularly to those people who come and have a message, have a pure message.
Question.
Please.
Question what's going on, to say, this shouldn't continue.
Right.
Is that why these men are turning away?
And I didn't tell that part of the story. These were actually the ones that through him had become Babis, right? Mm-hmm. And they said, okay, we believe in these things. But then they had never seen a woman without a veil. And as soon as she uncovered herself, they went crazy. They wanted to kill themselves or kill her. And this is showing that. And so at that moment, Baha'u'llah, who was a disciple of a follower of the Baha, he came and counseled them and tried to nurture them and make them understand that we are breaking away from Islam the way it was, and this is a new faith. This is the beginning of a new faith, that you have to have a new understanding. It's easy for us to say. So back then, some of them backed away, said, we don't want to be any part of this, You guys are different. You guys are crazy. You go back to our own traditions. And some of them stayed, and some of them were counseled and became what they call true Babis.
Were they, I'm sure they were just persecuted just in general if someone didn't like them, but were they charged with crimes against the government or the
Yes,
state?
that too.
Okay.
Now, I need to tell you this distinction also, that at the time of the Bab, defense was accepted. So when there were 500-600 of these Babis, and the government was a very cruel, brutal government, wanted them to come and submit themselves and be killed, they defended themselves, a lot of these people. Eventually all of them were slaughtered. But then Baha'u'llah, the second step of pacification of the Muslim world was that that it is better to be killed rather than kill anybody. So from the time of Baha'u'llah, which is 1863, when he openly declared himself, then basically they gave up. They said that, we won't defend us. If you want to kill us, kill us. And so for this reason, it's being taped, that's okay. For this reason, the Middle East in general, and the government of Iran in particular, are kind of afraid of Baha'is, because anyone we want to kill, we kill. But these Baha'is, they don't even defend themselves. So if you want to kill us, kill us. And this, he said, Baha'u'llah taught that this is the path of faith. That you forgive even your enemies, because you're not your enemy. You're not their enemies, they're your enemies. And you, if they want to kill you at that point, you submit yourself and say, kill me. But then I have found that truth that is more important than my earthly life, just really living a few more lives. So a few members of my family have been killed and executed and tortured and still being tortured and executed. This is the last version of this. These wonderful people, most of them I knew, some of them were my closest friends, and were the members of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Iran. They were all executed by the new government of Iran. These 10 women, 11 women, I think, and were Sunday school teachers, from the age of 16, 17 until 40, 45, in the city of Shiraz. They were executed on the charge, not on the charge of rising against the government, on the charge of teaching the Baha'i teachings. Just like that. Many of these people, some of the most wonderful people, I love them, I knew. My friend Susanna probably knew a lot of them as well. Baha'u'llah tells us that religion, or this revival, appears in the darkest corner of the earth, so that the light would shine and the light would be seen, and those who are transformed can then transform the humankind. So they were very innovative in the way they killed. So this is just to show you one, so we won't disturb you very much. So this is just a vision of, they don't have a camera at the time, but in 1860s, 70s maybe, they would put them on the ground and they would nail the nail or hammer nails in his heart in order to kill him. So that happened to thousands upon thousands of people. In the name of God and religion. That's also the strange part of it. The strange part of the story. So with that, I was enough for that story of Bob, and then I'll turn it around. I said, I have this space here going west this way. So then after the Bab was executed, Baha'u'llah, who was in Tehran, the capital city, which is still the capital city, he was put in jail together with a number of other Babis. The year was 1852, and tortured brutally. This was one of the worst jails in the world. I don't think there's any other jail like it. And they took 10, 15 of these Babis and executed them in front of everybody on a daily basis. Baha'u'llah came from a family of a prince. He was his father was a minister of the court. So I don't know whether that had anything to do with it, or he still had influence, or God wanted it with this manner. They didn't execute him. But they made the deal that he should, they would banish him out of Iran under house arrest. Under the joint custody, I mean, this is one man, still the same dynamic. I mean, they're afraid of the spread of this ideology. So under the custody of Persian Empire and all that region, including Iraq and all that, was called Ottoman Empire. That we will keep him and his family strangled in a home under house arrest until the end of their lives, and this thing would go away. But it didn't go away. When Baha'u'llah was still in Tehran, but was still in this jail, which was in Tehran, they call it the Black Pit. It was a Black Pit. He got this inspiration that he's that messenger of God of this age. And he has this message. Oneness of God, oneness of humanity, there's one race, it's a human race, equality, all of that kind of stuff. And oneness of religion. That all of these divisions between the Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Christians and Jews, this is all because of our lack of understanding, or denominations within the religion. And that come and study this for yourself, this is independent search for truth, and you'll find the truth for yourself. But at that point, he kept it secret. So I'll mention this and then we can start reading something. 1852, this was what we call Baha'u'llah's secret declaration in Tehran, in that jail. When he got that vision, maybe Rory can read. You can read these passages that are marked. Just not the last one, then go to the next one. That gives us the beginning.
I was but a man like others, when lo, the breezes of all glorious were wafted over me, and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from thy one way, who is almighty and all-knowing.
So this is basically what he says, the vision that he got in that jail.
When he was in the jail.
Go to the next, where there's the mark. You see the mark somewhere?
During the days I lay in the prison of Tehran, through the galling weight of the chains and the stench-filled air allowed me but little sleep. Still in those infrequent moments of slumber, I felt as if something flowed from the crown of my head over my breast, even as a mighty torrent that precipitates itself upon the earth from the summit of the lofty mountain. Every limb of my body would, as a result, be set afire. At such moments, my tongue recited what no man could bear to hear.
My object is none other than the betterment of the world and the tranquility of its people, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established.
So ultimately, if you want to say the Baha'i faith in one sentence, in one phrase, oneness of mankind. And the challenge is to see if this works. One of my major fields of study in the doctoral program was global policy and globalism. And I've read so many things that all these scientists and philosophers and writers have written. It doesn't compare, from my perspective. Even one of the books that Baha'u'llah has written with regard to this vision as to how to bring about more peace. If nothing else, it's very important for humanity to read this vision of peace and starting on ourselves to really change deeply in order to bring about peace. So anyway, here then, we said that he had that secret declaration that when he was in Baghdad, after 10 years, 1863, we're talking about the Middle East, 107 years ago, 160 years ago. That's why they just could not come out and say it was a step-by-step process. The bomb and his challenges and his suffering and all of those. And then Baha'u'llah, his suffering, and 10 years. And of course, within 10 years, before we get to 1963, let's review a couple passages. Baha'u'llah composed many prayers and many meditations. And so among his prayers, who wants to read? Let's read one of his prayers.
Thy name is my healing, O my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise.
So this was one of his prayers, and
Question.
please,
While
please interrupt me anytime you wish.
while he was in prison, he was writing. Was he passing his information out to
Yeah.
someone? How? I mean,
Interesting, that's what it, yes. So, from the time he was in Baghdad, he was basically under house arrest. He wasn't in prison anymore. And there were a lot of family and basically disciples, what we call Baha'is at the time, were also there. Yes, he wrote them, and basically he sent them through these pages of devoted people to different areas where the faith was spreading. So it basically began at that time, and then these Baha'is then started sending them back to the center, to the Baha'i center, where the originals were then collected and compiled. And there's one building, one of these buildings is actually called the Center for Study of the Text, something like that. Because we're not talking about one or two books, over 100 books. So a large group of people from all over the world are studying them, deciphering them, authenticating them, translating them into different languages, and sending them even until now. So that was from the time of Baha'u'llah. And there are stories of those pages. And at that time, I guess the means of transportation was a donkey, the best they could do it. And many of them could not even afford a donkey. So we're talking about 500 miles, 600 miles. They would take this particular letter or message, and they would take it to the 5, 6 Baha'is in that city, and trying to explain the vision of Baha'u'llah, both in terms of prayers and meditation for the healing of self and individual, and then his global vision, how those other divisions can be healed across the planet for the humankind. I want to see if I can find, if you just look through this, you will see the different buildings there. One of the buildings is that building of the next to the archives of study of the text, study of the holy text.
Is this the property that you sent out the video on? Did you send out the video on the Baha'i Center in Haifa, or was that something I looked at on YouTube?
Probably looked at one. The one I sent you was the Baha'i House of Worship in India.
Okay, I
With
saw
some prayer. But I may have sent that one also, but you could have seen it.
there was one I watched, and it looked incredible.
This one right here is that Center for the Study of the Text. So they have just one building with tens of scholars from Europe and US, Canada, and other places who are just delving into these things, and then when they're assured of it, they would publish it.
And do they volunteer to go do the work? Is that how it happens?
It's a combination of volunteer and selection, which is for that particular job, it is selection, because they're really scholars. Many of them are scholars of religion. They have have the PhDs in religious studies, or they have best language skills, and things like that. But there are about 600 or 700 volunteers who, from all across the globe, and also that's another beautiful aspect. I've been to Haifa a couple of times, 3-4 times maybe. They request volunteering, and you see a lot of young people from Africa and Australia and all places who go and volunteer, and then through this living together in purity and in submission and for service for 1 year, usually 1 year of service, then that bond of unity across the planet also germinates.
Are they working on building the property up more and the gardens up more and finishing off more of the property that's owned?
Most of it is done. There's still a few remaining projects. Actually, there are two. One is the huge part of Haifa, which is this mountain, Mount Carmel. The building, one is archives, one is Center for the Study of the Text. One is the Shrine of the Law. I have to tell you that story too. After he was executed, his remains were thrown to a ditch outside. And then a couple of his followers, in the middle of the night, they went and picked up the remains, put it in a casket, and hid it. You can't believe it, for some 50 years. Take it from city to city until they could smuggle it out of Iran and sent it to Haifa, where it so happened that it became the center of the Baha'i faith. And there it took several years. The very beginning of this, here, this is the shrine. That became the Shrine of the Baha in the heart of Mount Carmel, with 19 terraces going from the bottom of the.
So basically,
Yeah.
all of this going up from
Yeah,
here is
from
all
here.
part of the.
And all around it.
No, is this building all the way up here? Is that also part of the?
Except for this one, it goes along with this one, along that way. That is the hotel. Don Caramel is the name of the hotel.
Okay, so it's a little beyond.
Beyond it. So this is the heart of the mountain, is where all these Baha'i properties are. They're still planning to build a Baha'i house of worship, as I explained the other day, which has the vision of the 9 sides and from all religions to come together. That is something to be built. And one thing which is also built is the center, which is called the Universal House of Justice, that building. That is the main building there now. The Universal House of Justice, which is the governing body of Baha'is all across the globe, which we hope, Baha'is hope that becomes a symbol of how the world needs to be governed. Not for self-interest, but for human interest. Not based on the electioneering that we see today, that the guy stands up and says, vote for me, I'm the best one, this guy's the bad guy. The Baha'i election is completely opposite of what we see. I need to explain that too, as part of this thing. I'll do it now. Basically, in any city that there are more than 9 Baha'is, then we have an election. And the election system that Baha'u'llah proposed, mandated, or based on his writings and Abdu'l-Baha and clarification, is that there's no electioneering. No electioneering, no. No candidacy. And no propaganda. Now we have 50 Baha'is, 100 Baha'is, 1,000 Baha'is. They said the way you elect is like this. Nobody says that you vote for me on the good line. If you have proven yourself to be a servant of the community, if you have proven yourself to be a detached person who is there to serve, and nothing for himself, not for personal gain, then whoever wants would vote for you, secretly, and secret ballot, and secret ballot. And then they become what we call the local spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of that city. When there are, now I think there are about 1,000 area cities where there are Baha'is in the US, for example, then once a year, on a national basis, it's a 2-step process. every community selects a representative. The Baha'i Center in the U.S. is in, the National Center is in Chicago, where that main temple is. Then they go to Chicago. These electors, they're electors basically. And they in turn, through this process, they vote for 9 people who become the national spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of each country. I think there are about, how many countries have national spiritual assemblies? I don't exactly know, but I know that there are over 200 countries that are Baha'is in all those 200 countries. Maybe 130, 140 of them have national spiritual assembly. And so all these national spiritual assemblies, then every 5 years they gather in Haifa, Israel. And through this same process of no electioneering, no candidacy, no propaganda, secret ballot, these NSA members vote for 9 people who could be from any country of the world. It doesn't matter, because Baha'u'llah says the world is one country and mankind is citizens. And then they vote for 9 people and they become the universal house of justice. And they function for 5 years. Now, this is just part of the administrative process that Baha'u'llah envisioned to do away with the mess that we see in our political system. In many ways it's a mess, because Baha'u'llah says you have to have a system that does not divide people. The system that we have, you become Democrat, you become Republican, they're the bad guys, they're the good guys. There's none of that in the Baha'i system. And Baha'u'llah says that this is a vision that brings us to total unity. And then, no one-man person. So 9 people, together they consult, together they decide for the good of mankind, for no self-interest, and that's the way they function. Any other thought? Then we should read a couple other things. So Baha'u'llah's writing, we came to this point. Okay, so I mentioned here that then in 1863, Baha'u'llah said that he's that manifested God that humanity has been waiting for, and he has a plan to create peace on earth as it is in heaven. So this is his plan, which would take 30 years. And then in the year 1863 from Baghdad, they banished him further. They wanted to banish him as far away because his language is Farsi, and they were afraid that he would only influence the Persians. So they took him as far away as possible. They took him to Adrianople. Does anyone know what Adrianople is? Adrianople. It's a city near Greece, the farthest corner part of the Ottoman Empire, which is still part of Turkey. So they took him there in 1863 for a period of 5 years until 1868. All they want to do is to keep him on the house arrest and take him as far away as possible so that he won't cause trouble. And he kept causing trouble. He couldn't help himself. But now in this time period, which means from 1852 to 1853, when he was banished to Baghdad, until 1863, he wrote a lot of things, Song of Prayers, and maybe that book that you hold in. Yes, and just that passage. So, and this is what he calls his book. A lot of his writing is mystical writing. This is what he calls 7 Baddies, and he says, ultimately for man to become human rather than an aggressor, we have to become nothing. If we totally become nothing, then we are servant of mankind. So this is his last vision of how we become nothing. This one paragraph.
This station is the dying from self and the living in God. The being poor in self and rich in the desired one. Poverty is here referred to significant being poor in the things of the created world, rich in the things of God's world. For when the true lover and devoted friend reacheth to the presence of the beloved, the sparkling beauty of the loved one and the fire of the lover's heart will kindle a blaze and burn away all veils and wrappings. Yea, all he hath from heart to skin will be set aflame, so that nothing will remain save the friend.
So basically, the mystical writings are basically how can we become totally detached and unworldly and servant of humanity. So this is one of those books. And together with that, we want to read another passage from, we have read a lot of passages from Hidden Words. There's one passage there I have chosen. I don't know if I can. So that's mystical writing. This is moral teaching.
This one is mine, so it's
Oh, that's
not
yours.
going to be mine.
Maybe that's the one I want. Let's read one passage.
Read all three?
No, just the one.
Just the one. O friend, in the garden of thy heart plant not but the rose of love, and from the nightingale of affection and desire loosen not thy hold. Treasure the companionship of the righteous, and eschew all friendship with the ungodly.
So these are all the different counsels as to how we can become as perfect as we can become human being. Not only human, but being. What is the being part? How do you see the
Being present, a human is a
human is just a body and all that.
and being is
Soul,
Talking about God consciousness.
God consciousness, spiritual. Okay, so a lot of his writings in terms of moral and mystical teachings is how can we become as godly as we can. When Jesus, the Bible says we're made in the image of God, how can we really put it into reality? So a lot of it is that. And then the third book that he wrote is a larger book. You won't read anything from this, but this is his explanation of the holy books, what he called progressive revelation. It's called the Book of Certitude, a very important book that I wish, or I will tell you that if we have 3-4 really interested people, there are a few things that we can study without having a deadline, so we can read a few pages and reflect on it. He explains, for example, this idea of, Jesus says that in some passage that at the point of return, the sun would be hiding under the cloud, right? And the moon would not give light, and all the stars would fall, all of these kind of things. So he explains every one of these passages, what do they really mean? So this one that I mentioned, it says when it says that sun would be hidden under the cloud, it means that the light of religion is not bright anymore. And Christianity is divided to 400 sects. I mean, the way I understand it, Jesus would not understand it, right? Is this my religion? I came here for love. I came here for unity. So he says that is what it means. Same thing in Islam, same thing in other religions. It's divided, right? God is about oneness. God is about unity. God is about healing. God is about not having big warlike. And then he explains, his son explains in another passage, it was right before World War I. How can one Christian nation rise against another Christian nation? How can you call yourselves followers of Jesus, right? So he was saying that is when the sun is under the cloud, hidden under the cloud. When the stars fall to the ground, he says that the stars are the preachers of all religions. That because of self and because of self-interest, many of them could have had good intentions. But the good intention of dividing us into Lutherans and Episcopalian, this and this, cannot be from Jesus. Jesus is one. This is some kind of misunderstanding or not understanding that we should sit down as children of God, like what I said the other day, talk to each other and see what the point of difference is and reconcile it.
And also, if the position were true and pure, there would be no division.
Exactly. That's Paul's message. God is pure, God is love, God is oneness, Jesus was the same thing, all those other manifestations were the same thing. This is man who has done it. The sun is on the cloud, which means that Jesus and Buddha said that, I don't understand you guys, this is something else. And the stars were preachers, they have fallen to the ground because they are not representing many. They don't have his light anymore by causing this much hatred and division among mankind. And then bringing about hundreds of years of inquisition and crusades and what we see in the Muslim world. This is all because, I'll explain, that light shines for about 1,000 years. There was one Christianity for the first 1,000 years. And then after that, the division that comes is because the sun is under the cloud. So explain all of those things so beautifully in this book that we should really study together. And so, you have to see you later. Thank you. We'll be done in 10 minutes, unfortunately. But I have done something with my friend who said that, I want us to at least read a passage from each one of these to get a feel for the essence of what Baha'u'llah was talking about, and we can't do it in our 15 minutes. What should we do? So the suggestion was that we take it for you, basically from each one of these books. And I'll send that one in addition to this, so that I hope you can go through it and delve a little bit more, and then if you become really interested, we'll follow more. So, in 1868, at least we can read a couple of passages. We said his secret declaration in 1852, his open declaration, 1863, his universal declaration, or universal declaration, 1868. And this is really the beginning of what that global vision of Baha'u'llah. We were still under house arrest in Adianabad, the farthest corner of Ottoman Empire and the farthest from Iran, under house arrest so that nobody could hear him. And at that point, what he smuggled out was a series of tablets, which is composed in 2 books. One is this, Proclamation of Baha'u'llah. I have a passage from there. And then the other one is this other book. And what he did, he wrote to all these rulers in Europe, the Queen Victoria, was Elizabeth, in England, Napoleon III of France, Nicholas of Russia, and the Emperor Abdul-Aziz of Ottoman Empire, and Nasser-ed-Din Shah of Iran, and the Pope and religious leaders. And he basically told them that you're stuck in the way you are because you are under your own turf. You want to aggrandize yourself rather than helping humanity, to all these kings. And that you have to get out of this mode and come together, and basically that was the pre-vision of League of Nations and United Nations, which was semi-perfect. But that was basically his vision of the United Nations. You need to come together to consult, rather than fight. They're still continuing fighting, and fight and just look for self-interest. It has to become global interest. And among them, the passage that you have, what is the passage? Is it the one to Nasser-ed-Din Shah? The one you're having?
It starts with O King.
Yeah, okay. This one, and that king is Nasser. I have to tell you the story of that one too. Some of them, I don't have the exact story as to what happened. I know that Queen Elizabeth of England got it, and actually Baha'u'llah was somewhat complementary to Queen Elizabeth because that was the point. That was the time that she had started on emancipation of women, on doing away with slavery and all of that. And in that tablet, Baha'u'llah commends her for the start of the new age, for the things you're doing, for changing the mess that you're in. But then he reprimanded others like Napoleon III, who was very warlike and selfish and all that, and all the others. And this one in particular, the one to the king of Iran, the page that took it was a 17-year-old boy, Baha'i, a follower of Baha'u'llah. And of course, and he took it waiting in front of the gate of the king. The name of the king was Nasser ibn Shah. And then he was holding it, I have something for you, a letter for you. So they got the letter, they got him, they arrested him, and they tortured him to death. I mean, they killed him by torturing, putting iron on his head and his body to confess as to how he brought it, or the accomplices and this and that, for him to have brought this message. You want to read a passage from that?
O king, I was but a man like others, asleep upon my couch, when lo, the breezes of the all-glorious were wafted over me, and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing. And he bade me lift up my voice between earth and heaven, and for this there befell me, but hath caused the tears of every man of understanding to flow. The learning current amongst men I studied not, their schools I entered not. Ask of the city wherein I dwell, that thou mayest be well assured that I am not of them who speak falsely. This is but a leaf which the winds of the will of thy Lord, the Almighty, the All-Praise, have stirred. Can it be still when the tempestuous winds are blowing? Nay, by him who is the Lord of all names and attributes. They move it as they list. The evanescences of nothing before him who is the ever-abiding. His all-compelling summons hath reached me, and caused me to speak his praise amidst all people. I was indeed as one dead when he behest was uttered. The hand of the will of thy Lord, the compassionate, the merciful, transformed me.
Basically, the beginning of this message is telling him that all the things you're doing to me, it's not really from me, it's from God. And that he, just like Jesus and Buddha and others, he didn't go to any school, he didn't have any education. He just could read and write. That was basically it. But with this volume of what he's given us, those who accept him say that this is not from him. This cannot be just from one man hallucinating, saying that this is what it is. This is from a source much greater than him. But anyway, from 1868, we just conclude, running out of time. They took him to the final prison, which was Haifa Naka, in today's Israel. And they put him in that jail that I showed you. After 2 years of that severe incarceration, they allowed him to go to a house. And then a lot of his writings are also from that time period. This one that you see, we don't have time reading it. This one is his book of laws. Let me just tell you what these books are and what we'll do. So this is that's his book of laws. He wrote a lot of books, Tabernacle Unity. This was the Zoroastrians, a lot of people in Iran at the time were Zoroastrians, as to explain to him. From different religious perspective, he would write to them and explain it. Explain a couple more. Then he wrote a lot of what are called tablets. This is a bunch of tablets on different issues of humanity, whether it's on the question of race or religion or nationalism, and all the problems that mankind sees and how we can heal and reconcile this. One of the reasons why Baha'is do not interfere in politics is because politics is divisive, and you cannot become a Baha'i and be some was Republican, some was Democrats, some was pro-England, some was pro-Germany and all that. It's one race, it's the human race, all that. This is a selection of his writings, and you can read the passage here.
That's interesting, but if everyone were a Baha'i, then that would be, as far as
Finish the
humanity,
thought,
as far as, yeah, I mean, just as far as humanity and everything, I mean, if there were no, so basically if everyone was Baha'i, there would be no individual governments, that would be the Council of Nine. That would basically make, I mean, evolution, going down hundreds of years from now, say that everybody found the purity and the truth in the religion.
Right. For as long as there be earth, the way I see it, and I see this, there'll be man and woman, there'll be races, there'll be families, right? There'll be towns, there'll be tribes. Nothing wrong with that. There'll be nations. But the whole point of all this, there'll be religions. But the whole point of this is how can we really get along? He never talks about the point where everybody in the world is Baha'i. But he talks about a point when everybody understands this vision of oneness. This vision that there's one God. And what does it mean there's one God? Have we really become God-like? The ultimate vision is to become God-like, and therefore then the separation will go away. And there's healing of mind.
Do Baha'i believe, like, in Christianity, they believe that everybody is the child of God, and that, obviously there are enlightened ones such as Muhammad, such as, is that basically the same? I mean, so are we all children of God? Do we all have, are we all, I mean, I understand we're not going to be God. We can strive to be. We all
strive to be the best we can.
Right, to be the best that we can, but are we all basically, is there part of God? Like in the Catholic Church, they say, the Holy Spirit, what does the Baha'i believe on that?
Similar, that we're all children of the same God. We all belong to Him. We all need to strive toward oneness. We need to strive toward oneness. And this striving toward oneness, He has given a plan for it. As I said, at least 90% of it is to how to heal this mind so that it become colorblind. When He talks about equality, it really believes in equality. Then He doesn't fight for the nation, but he works for the healing of nations. Just a different perspective.
Praise for Him.
Right.
So do Baha'is vote in political elections or serve in the military? Is that permitted?
You can vote, but in a non-partisan manner, as an independent, for
Okay.
example. You serve in military at this time of human progress or lack of it in non-combatant status, except if you're forced to do so. You always also, until whatever time it is, you also remain obedient to the government. So it's a plan not to disrupt any balance that we have, but at the same time work for the ultimate peace.
Is that all in the laws? What the things that we just discussed as far as the government, as far as voting, as far as fighting, is that in the law?
The basic of it is in the laws. The basic of this universal justice, the method of election, all of that is in the laws, but then most of it deals with prayers and fasting and purification of self on the law part. And then, of course, he explains those parts. And then a lot of other things are in the teachings, just like the admonitions to the kings and rulers and preachers and popes and all that, and the teaching as to how to heal the humankind. You want to read that one, and then I'll tell you about the books and we'll end.
The measure of the revelation of the prophets of God in this world, however, must differ. Each and every one of them hath been the bearer of a distinct message and hath been commissioned to reveal himself through specific acts. It is for this reason that they appear to vary in their greatness. Their revelation may be likened unto the light of the moon that sheddeth its radiance upon the earth. Though every time it appeareth, it revealeth a fresh measure of its brightness, yet its inherent splendor can never diminish, nor can its light suffer extinction.
So he again keeps emphasizing about the oneness of religion, that all of them are one and the same, and then they came at different time period for different reasons and all that. I'll just tell you the title of these books, and you'll end because we're running over time. So this is gleanings, just basically the basics of these teachings. This Baha'i World Faith is a combination of Baha'u'llah's writings and Abdu'l-Baha's son's writing. There was a Baha'i lady whose name was, forgot the name, but anyway, she was one of the early American Baha'is. Abdu'l-Baha was still under house arrest in 1904. She went to Israel, and she had a lot of questions for Abdu'l-Baha. At that time, Baha'u'llah passed away in 1892, and of course, Abdu'l-Baha's son was the interpreter. Also, for the first time in religious history, Baha'u'llah has a written will, so that two people cannot come, so that, you know, we believe in this kind of Baha'i faith. He was the sole interpreter. And so she had a lot of questions, particularly from a Christian perspective. So he asked them, and that becomes some answer questions. Very interesting book.
Does it say who she is in the beginning of that?
Say again?
Does it say the lady's name? I know you
Yes.
said you didn't remember. Does it say her name in the beginning?
Yes, it says at the beginning. What was it? I forget it. Anyway, Laura Clifford Barney. If you look at her, she was apparently a prominent woman. She has other things too on the internet. So she went all the way from San Francisco, where she was, to Israel at that time, 1904.
There was a lady named Courtney Baylor who I was just curious if it was her.
Yeah. Oh, Canada, you say?
Courtney Baylor?
Baylor, I don't know about her. So that's also another interesting read. This is the people from across the world who were asking questions from Abdu'l-Baha, and he was writing it. So this is a selection of his writings. And then this is a very important read. I wanted to just use the passage. I think I've recorded it, but you can see. In 1912, after he was released from the jail of Persians and Ottomans, the Baha'is of Europe and US wanted to bring him, and they brought him to Europe, and then finally to US and Canada, and he gave hundreds of talks in universities and churches, including in the church, and all that on the vision and mission of the Baha'i faith. So that's also an important read. And then after he passed away in 1921, his grandson, according to his will and testament, and that's his will and testament, which also explains the Baha'i administrative order in solidifying this vision of oneness. He wrote several things about very erudite person in terms of the problems of the world, further elaboration of these writings. The Advent of Divine Justice is one of them, the Promised Day is Come is another one, the World Order of Baha'u'llah is another one. In that recording I have at least one passage of each one. The Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. And then finally, when he passed away from 1963, we had this universal election of this universal justice, which lead the further Baha'is, but more importantly, they have basically 5 or 10 years, they have a pronouncement. And that pronouncement is basically how much humanity has advanced in this formative age to bring us closer to this golden age. It's also on a step-by-step explanation. The promise of world peace was 1985. The century of light was early 1990s. All of these is that what can be accomplished? What more do we have to do in order to get there? The turning point, close to the year 2000, of, again, all these explanations. Then the prosperity of humankind, the turning point for all nations, all of these every 4 or 5 years. And finally, maybe you can read one passage from this last one, which is which called is one common faith. This common faith, understanding this vision. And just read one passage and read this.
The reoccurring proof of the existence of God, wherefore is that from time immemorial he has repeatedly manifested himself in the larger sense. As Baha'u'llah explains, the vast epic humanity's religious history represents the fulfillment of the covenant, the enduring promise by which the creator of all things assures race of the unfailing guidance, essentials to its spiritual and moral development, and calls onto it to internalize and give expression to these values. One is free to dispute the historic interpretations of the evidence of the unique role of the messenger of God, if that is one's purpose, but such speculation is of no help in accounting for developments that have transformed through the produced changes in human relationship. Critical to social evolution at intervals so rare that known existence can be counted on one's fingers, the
Manifestations.
of God.
I guess basically saying that, again, the oneness of these religions. And then it concludes in this thing as to the oneness of the essence of religion. And again, ultimately what that Methodist preacher said that I said at the very beginning. The moral teaching of all religions is one and the same. The social teaching must change, but the caveat here, what Baha'u'llah says, is that if you change it, that is, if this Methodist preacher changes it, and that mullah in Iran changes it, and this Episcopalian changes it, what happens? Then there will be another split, another denomination, and nothing will be achieved. But if you first understand the holistic nature of humanity, and then put this into action, and I think every one of them is subject to question. I said, how do you elect? How do you serve military? How do you do this? How do you vote? And everything else, and then that oneness of humanity will be achieved. The synopsis of the history of the Baha'i faith, which is about 10,000 pages, is this, that if there are 3 or more people interested, we will do that, which is the history of the Baha'i faith in a short format, maybe, I don't know, 7, 8 sessions. Who should I leave it with? One of you 4 people. So whoever, if you like, so I left that one with you, so you will, tell me whenever there are 2 or more people who are interested in reading the history of the Baha'i faith, in the synopsis of it. We'll get together either here or in my home, your home, and we'll do it. And the other one that I will like us to do, again, if 2 or 3 more people would be interested, is this one, which is that 90%. How can we truly be transformed? It's called Baha'u'llah's Teaching on a Spiritual Reality. It's 35 chapters. I'd really like us to sit down and each chapter is 5 to 10 pages. Read that one, reflect on it, and see if it is practical to be totally transformed. Who should I leave this one with? Okay. So, if you lead the group on this one and that one, we'll do it. Let me also say one more thing, and that is that in order to avoid any kind of division, so that this would become one, not hundreds of interpretations, this universal justice continuously respond to every individual who asks them any sensible question. In all previous religions, questioning was forbidden. For 1,500 years, you know, that Christians were not even allowed to read the Bible, right? But Baha'u'llah has done the opposite. He says that any question is welcome. All I'm asking you is asking a polite question. So a lot of these books that you see are responses to questions. And finally, the universal justice, everyone who asks a question, they say that this needs further elaboration, they elaborate it, and they put it in a book like this, like a guidance. Thank you so much.